In today's episode, Tara and I tackle the tough topic of co-parenting with a narcissistic or abusive ex. Most adults find these relationships very tricky to navigate. How do we help our children who have less resources than ourselves? And the self-help tip is how to deal with ourselves in a more compassionate way by treating ourselves as a friend.
Thank you for joining us on Breaking Free with Kerry and Tara, the podcast where we talk about strategies, tips, and tricks for navigating and recovering from toxic relationships.
I'm your host, Dr. Kerry McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience and the author of Love You More, an inside graphic look at my survival of a narcissistic relationship.
And I'm your other host, Tara Blair-Ball, certified relationship coach, abuse survivor, and author of Reclaim and Recover, Heal from Toxic Relationships with the 7-Step Guided Journal.
We're thrilled that you're here with us today. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and leave us a review and let us know what you think of the show.
Today, we're going to be talking about co-parenting emotional challenges, especially when we're dealing with a toxic, narcissistic, abusive ex that we're now having to manage our children in various ways. I personally co-parent with my toxic ex who has tons of narcissistic tendencies. And this is a topic a lot of people end up talking to me about because it's so hard. And the level of emotional control and regulation, and our children are, I always want what's best for my kids, and I want to do everything that's best for them, and that makes the situation even harder. Do you hear a lot of things about this, Kerry?
Yeah, I do. It's where, well, here's one of the observations I have from the outside, because my narcissistic relationship was not, I didn't have children with him. So when it ended, it ended. But what I've noticed is those who have kids, it's like it never stops being a nightmare. Now it just moved from what happened inside of the relationship. Now you're battling around everything related to children, whether it's financial pieces or visitations or custody, or even whether or not you get to leave the country to take a vacation. It just is like the gift that never stops giving. Yeah, I hear a lot about it.
Or like the nightmare that you never stop dreaming.
Yeah, they never wake up from. Exactly. What do people come to you mostly about in regards to this? What would you say the top problems are?
I think the top problem that I see the most often is this can be the thing really that keeps people in that relationship. They don't want to be without their children. They're very, very scared of what the other parent might do, not seeing their kids, feeling like the other parent will and is going to alienate them, and not having as much control, feeling like they don't have as much control over the situation because they wouldn't be there as much. But really, that's the case whether you remain in the relationship or not. And that's something I really had to hold on to for myself, because I too struggled leaving the relationship for I struggled leaving for a lot of reasons. I was very trauma bonded. I was very dependent on that partner. I really felt like there wasn't any hope for me in finding love again. That was the best I would ever get. That's all I deserved. And I also was concerned about my children and what might happen to them, not being in a 2-parent home. There's a lot of issues with that. But also, could I do it alone? Could I be a good parent by myself? And or would that separation and them spending that time with their father by themselves ruin them? Those are big things that made me feel really stuck for long enough time.
That's what I've noticed too. I noticed that people get really scared that they know how toxic the person is, and if they leave, then they think, I'm now abandoning my child to this person when they're with them full time. And that is a valid point. I understand that fear, and it's a logical concern. You're right. You don't know what's going to happen in that household when you're not there. And I'm sure it feels like you're softening the blow, or at least you can stand in between and be the mediator if you continue to be there. But there's another piece that's missing, in my opinion, and that is when you are with that toxic person, you're not at your best. You're actually in a fight or flight state constantly. And so your children are getting you in a compromised state. They're really not getting you in a relaxed, in your fully healthy state, which that's a loss, because then they're having to deal with all of that. I see you nodding your head that's, yeah. Have you heard of the 50% rule versus 100%? Like people like, well, isn't it better that they have me 100% of the time I can protect them than versus if I'm only there 50% of the time, then I'm not there, then 0% of the, have you heard of that kind of, I've seen, oh yeah, I've heard it kind of tossed out. It's a social media thing. It's not really actually based on research or science, but I thought that's an interesting kind of way to view it, is that 50%, it's actually not 50%. They get 100% of you in that 50% of the time. That you at your best, you at your healthiest. But right when you're with them at 100% of the time, they're not getting you at your best at 100%. You're maybe at best 50% or less.
And I totally agree with that. And that is one thing that my therapist at the time that I was working with helped me really reframe for myself in leaving, that it wasn't, like you said, me abandoning my children, that it was, in fact, me choosing and acting as the healthiest person in that relationship, because I want my children to have a healthy relationship role model. I want them to have a healthy role model, period. I wanted them to have, me at my best. My ex and I fought constantly. It was really nasty. It was really ugly. That all that tension, all that walking on eggshells. I can't imagine how awful it would have been for my children if they'd been older. I left when my children were 18 months old. I had twins with my ex, and I know, even though they were very young, that what they saw had an impact on them. I know that. I will say that it has helped me in reading a research saying that it usually takes 3 to 5 years for children after divorce to heal. And that can also depend on their ages. My children, I'm very grateful they don't remember me and their father together. And I'm very grateful for that. It does mean that I deal with some uncomfortable things. Like my daughter has asked a few times, why aren't you with daddy? Daddy would, I was wearing a dress. She's like, daddy would think that would be pretty. And they've sort of come out of nowhere, like there's, she's even told me at one point that she wished I was married to daddy and not my current husband. I know she wouldn't be saying that if she had actually seen me and her father together. But I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know if he said something. He has definitely said and done things that have tried to alienate my children away from me. And that is another huge issue in terms of dealing with a toxic ex, is that they're not thinking of your children's best interests. They're thinking of theirs, and they're seeing the children as pawns that can be used against you. And it can take until the children are adults to overcome that. And it is, I will say, things with my ex have dramatically improved throughout the years. And I think the biggest thing about that has been in the boundaries that I've upheld over the years, and being consistent with those boundaries. I had to be really firm and clear. And we talked about boundaries in the previous episode where we talked about limited and low contact. But for a long time, my ex and I did not communicate over text message or phone call unless it was emergency. We primarily communicated over email. We really didn't have emotional conversations. If there's any attempt at emotional conversations, I would just not respond. I wouldn't engage. I just see him as like a coworker that I don't really want to have much to do with. And that helps, putting the focus on the kids and what's their best interest.
Yeah, that's really great advice. I can understand that. I think what people really struggle with, and this is what I hear a lot, is what do I do when my children come home upset? Or like even your daughter's comment. It's an odd comment. It does make you wonder where that's coming from. I hear you're even setting it. Maybe you didn't say this out loud, but I heard when you said that, you set a boundary with yourself saying, I'm not going to go pursue that. But only pursuing that is like, it's like you looking at social media profiles and looking at what he's doing. It's only going to lead you to be upset, and you can't change anything. It doesn't give you power to go figure out where that's coming from. But But when we know our kids are, in fact, someone just got a hold of me yesterday and said, my child is coming home more and more distraught every time that they have this visit with their parent, the other parent. It's tough. It's really tough to do that because tough on two levels. One, it's tough. It makes us feel like we shouldn't leave in a relationship because we know there's a potential and we don't want to hurt our kids that way. But it's also tough when you're the parent then who has to deal with all the emotional fallout from that visit. Then you end up thinking, have I hurt them? I don't know how to help them, and I certainly don't want to make things worse. I was thinking back to in episode 66, Brie and I had this big interview where we talked about what it was like to grow up in dysfunctional homes. I remember back in the day where I actually wished my parents would divorce, that I figured it would be better than what was happening in the house, the way things were. But, it didn't happen, and we just coped. But these are the questions that just that would have torn me apart as a parent. It would have, if I had to make those kinds of choices, hell no, I don't even know if I could have left, to be honest with you. So what kind of advice do you give then around these, particularly, we kind of already addressed, if you're in the relationship, you're not at your best, but what do you say when you see the kids come back from a visit and they're not doing well?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Logical standpoint. I'm going to start with an intellectual first. Okay. Document. And that's something that I had to really work hard on because it was very easy for me to not want to do that. And I think my reasoning was like, it seemed too much work and I'd already done so much work leaving the relationship. Why did I have to keep doing this? But in reality, we can't trust our ex, and we have to care for ourselves and our children and what's best. So your lawyer or whoever did your custody arrangement might make different suggestions based on the state you're living in. But in my state, single party recording is allowed, as well as any documentation. And documentation has to be very clearly dated. So what I did is I literally bought a yearly planner. And when something happens, like my children came home upset, their fingernails weren't cut, they were unshowered, unclean, they were bruises, whatever, I would document that on the specific day, everything that I had seen. And that's all admissible. If I had other evidence, like I received text messages or emails from my ex that were abusive or said something that was very concerning, like he got in a car wreck with my kids and they weren't buckled. Yeah. And I definitely, I printed everything out and included that in the planner that I could use to take to court. Another aspect of that is important is that if you're printing or using text messages, make sure you remove their contact name, because you can put anybody's contact name as your ex's, but the phone number is harder to mess up. Email is usually best. So another way that you can do to make it done in email is, email your ex what they texted you. Like, so, hey, today you texted me that you got in a car wreck and our daughter was unbuckled. Putting that in writing so you have it to protect yourself. Okay. And, there's a lot of things out there that say, like the children may come home upset, and actually that's good because that means you're the safe parent. That, that's nice and good. It still really sucks. I mean, it really, really is awful to be the safe parent, because I've dealt with my kids being, and my husband too, because my husband deals with this with his ex. I've dealt with my kids being really angry and rageful at me. I've dealt with my kids being hysterical and upset, and it's very hard not to get triggered and just totally dysregulated in those moments. Like, I've really had to learn to just, to say something like, I'm gonna walk in the bedroom. I'll be back in a couple minutes, and just like take some deep breaths, and come back and just remind them that I love them and that they're safe and that I'm here for them, and also set boundaries. Like, my daughter would come and she would just hit me sometimes. And that was heartbreaking. And it made me very concerned, because my ex and I had definitely done that to each other. And I immediately had that guilt of like, oh God, is this because they saw that when they were so little? And it just was very was hard. And I really had to work on my own regulation. Because, I mean, I'm the kind of person where if you hit me or yell at me, I'm going to hit you and yell at you back. And, I'm not going to do that with my child. My child doesn't deserve that. It's coming out of this very dysregulated place, and I have to be the regulated person. And that's part of the reason why, honestly, it was good that I left that relationship and good that I ended up co-parenting the way that I did, because anytime I wasn't with my kids, I could do things that were really self-nurturing. So I was the best parent I could be to them when I got them back. And I've really seen the benefits of that.
I have a different perspective, which is kind of interesting. So let me add this: is I've worked at a psychiatric facility with children, with children who needed hospitalization for psychological problems, and I also managed a runaway shelter. So I worked with teens who are in very conflictual, troubled, problematic homes. Interestingly enough, especially with the kids, they would have visits. Their parents would come in for a visit, and then we would then deal with, after the visit, what would happen. We saw the same thing. We saw them actually melt down. Sometimes they had to be put into the quiet room. There was a lot of acting out. So yes, these kids already had dysregulation problems, or they would not have been hospitalized in the hospital. But it's interesting that my experience as a person working with them, having to be around a dysregulated person who's I'm not related to, and I'll tell you, it's easier because I can emotionally disconnect. I don't feel a sense of, oh, this is my child who's crushed. I'm just saying, yes, this child's been really affected, and that's difficult. They're a challenge to deal with, but I have that degrees of separation that really helped me. I can't imagine being in the position that some of you and other parents are finding themselves in, to have to see your child in pain and knowing that this is what has to happen because there's not a lot of other choices. That would be really tough. And I love the fact that you're saying that can feel powerless and out of control, but where you have the control is what you do, as how you show up. And the other piece is the fact that you're documenting, so that you're creating a legal history, so that if your child is in danger, you can actually prove it legally.
Yeah, we need that kind of protection. And our kids can't necessarily, I also had an abusive childhood growing up, and I just know that my normal wasn't normal. And so we get to step in because we've done more healing. We've moved on. We've left that person to recognize that what our child is dealing with isn't normal, and advocate for them. And it can mean custody battles and lawyers, and that gets into legal situations with toxic exes, which can make all of that more difficult. It can make it really awful. But documenting is the best thing that we can do to help deal with that. Sorry about that. Do you recommend the parenting apps like I think it's Onboarding? I know that's not the only one. There's other ones as well that acts like a mediator, where you can like put in requests for money or what do you think of those apps? Are they helpful? I've used Onward before.
Okay.
And that's specifically for money. And I found that helpful because it also would, go ahead and calculate who owes what. And it's a record. I think any kind of mediator, like an app or something like that. And I know that there are others that I can't think of right now that actually you can do all your communication through that app as well. And it's easy to print out. It's easy to submit in court. I think any kind of boundaries like that you can create, that you can use to your advantage. Absolutely.
Yeah, because the worst situation I ever saw was years ago. I knew of a couple who, actually, they were both nice people. I knew them independently, but they just, as a couple, they were a disaster. And they communicated through their 6 and 8-year-old children.
Oh,
I was horrified. I mean, that was back when I was working at the hospital, thinking, that's not good, dude. That's really not. So I don't recommend that. Please, if you're having problems with that, the children should not be the mediator. They should not be the spokesperson for the two of you. You need to find a different way. But what I'm hearing is it's best to keep it in writing. And have you heard of the book BIF? Is that something that the brief, informative, factual, and friendly?
Mm-hmm. I have heard. And that's advice I followed myself. And something we should mention too is just parallel co-parenting.
Define that. What is that?
So parallel co-parenting, if your relationship with your ex is so unhealthy that you can't communicate, you can't trust, or things like that, you basically have a separate parenting journey than they do. You don't really communicate with them about day-to-day aspects. You're not trying to keep the kids to the same schedule or anything like that. You're really kind of raising the kid as if they were just, when they're with you, it's like you're their only parent. And that can be helpful when you're dealing with a really unhealthy situation. I, at one point, was doing parallel co-parenting, and part of the reason why is, I would reach out to my ex and I'd be like, I'm seeing these issues. Are you seeing these issues? And he's like, no. And I'm like, so you're saying that my son only acts this way at my house? And he's like, yeah. And my son and my daughter would both say, oh yeah, he totally does that at daddy's. But I would be lied to, and that was back to his presentation. He was going to look good. He was never going to look bad. And it was, me admitting, oh, I'm seeing these behavioral problems at my house, was admitting that, I looked like the bad parent. And that was a point of contention in our relationship, is that was a vulnerability that I had. I'd had a terrible mother. I was very concerned about it being a terrible mother myself. And so he preyed upon that, and really, he was a great dad, even though he was literally doing drugs.
Yeah.
And, but somehow I'm a bad mother because my son acts out. He would never admit that stuff would happen. And so there was no point in and trying to work with him, because there was going to be no honesty or transparency.
You're making an excellent, really great point to wrap up on, and that is, we need to always be aware that this person is who they are. Just because we're out of the relationship doesn't mean they're suddenly a better or easy person to get along with. They're going to, no, like I said, it just doesn't end. But they're going to find, they know you really well, and they know what your triggers are, and they love to push those hot buttons. So for you to be, what I've seen is I've asked people to kind of step back and say, are you in control here, or are they controlling the narrative? Are they controlling the script here? And often you can see, if you sort of if you step back a little bit, you can see, oh yeah, no, I'm giving them control because they're getting me worked up and I'm now reacting. So if we can just pause and do a little bit of a self-reflection, it's amazing how that can change it and put you back into, not that you're stopping what you don't like happening in the other home, but at least helps you not be so triggered and reactive with this individual.
Yeah, because that's what they want.
Yeah.
That's how you get
Absolutely.
you're off foot, and then they can scapegoat you. And I was scapegoated enough in my first marriage that I don't want that anymore.
No, I know. They're masterful at it. I don't think I've met a better group of people who know how to be that antagonistic, just masterful.
Yeah.
There's a lot to say on this. I mean, my mind's racing. I know we're going to have other episodes on this because it's such a big topic. I'm thinking, like, I would love to talk about how do we help our children be emotionally healthy when we have an unhealthy co-parent involved. I'm also thinking there's just lots of directions we can head at, but this is at least a good start to open this conversation. And I think it's something I know I have not spoke more about because it's outside my experience. So then it's not something I feel is connected, but I think it's something that touches so many people. It's a huge, huge problem, and we should be spending more time on it. So I'm glad we talked about this today.
Yeah, me too. I know I get reached out to about it a lot, because it's a unique and awful situation.
Exactly.
Today's self-help tip is to learn how to talk to yourself as if you were a friend. A lot of times when our friend is going through a tough situation, something's happening to them, they're dealing with an abusive partner, etc., it's really easy for us to think about how we would advise them or what they should do. But we don't, in turn, have that ability to do that with ourselves. And it's this thing called Solomon's paradox. It's the idea based on the name of King Solomon from the Bible. He was really good at advising other people, but his personal life was crap. So the idea is to create some distance, is thinking about the same situation that you're in. Think about if that was happening to your very best friend. What would you say to your best friend? What would you want them to do? What would you want them to know that might help them make some different choices? And really, it's about providing yourself some distance. And so you're not as as blind or as narrowly focused because you're not in the middle of it. You're thinking about it as if it was happening to someone you loved really dearly.
Yeah, I love this advice because I know for me, I get really triggered, and it brings me to the place of feeling ashamed, and then I get hard on myself. Whereas when I'm with a friend, I'm supportive. I'm not trying to shame them. I'm just trying to show up in a way that's helpful. So just I actually stumbled into doing this just kind of backwards, and it's so, yeah, I even say like, will anybody die based on what's just happened? No, of course not. And then it helps me like let up on myself a little bit.
Yeah. I also think I just sometimes feel maybe it's just as a result of being in so many unhealthy relationships, but like I can be so much kinder and gentler with other people than I can be with myself. And it's a good reminder that I deserve that too, that you deserve it, that we all deserve that level of kindness and compassion with ourselves too.
Yeah, it's great advice.
You have to co-parent with a toxic ex, or will you have to? What has that experience been like for you? And what do you think of talking to yourself as if you're a friend? Do you want to try it? Let us know. If you haven't yet, make sure you follow, subscribe, write a review, and if you know someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. If you're not following us on social media yet, you can follow me at Tara.relationshipcoach and Kerry at Kerry McAvoy, PhD. We'll see you back here next Monday, where we'll be talking about what most people don't understand about trauma bonds.